And I appreciate you all being here to talk about the place of science in a liberal arts education. The easy things to talk about are the great literature, perhaps the philosophy. But what is the place of science in a liberal education? I hope that we come away from this conversation together with a greater understanding of those sorts of questions, answers to those sorts of questions. I have a sponsor for today's talk. The sponsor is Stand Together Trust. Stand Together Trust supports local entrepreneurs who see beyond the one-size-fits-all model and are creating individualized opportunities for learners. We help thousands of partners apply a bottom-up approach to problem solving and empower a diverse and robust network of change makers to innovate and tackle tough challenges. We believe that every learner is unique and deserves an education that helps them to identify their gifts and pursue their passions. And we are thankful here at Great Hearts that Stand Together Trust is sponsoring this talk. This talk is being given by Dr. Seeley. I will read you from his bio here on the website. Andrew Seeley is co-founder and president of the Boethius Institute for the Advancement of Liberal Education. He also serves as director of advanced formation for educators at the Augustine Institute. He received a licentiate from the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies in Toronto and a PhD in Medieval Studies from the University of Toronto. Over his 3 decades as a tutor at Thomas Aquinas College in California, Dr. Seeley completed teaching every subject in its demanding integrated Great Books curriculum. I will tell you, I went to that school and went through that curriculum, and it is impressive that one could teach every one of those courses. He is a co-author of Declaration Statesmanship, a course in American government. Desiring to share his love of learning and teaching, Dr. Seeley co-founded the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education in 2005, where he served as executive director for 12 years and continues to contribute as a board member and faculty consultant. He became executive director of the Arts of Liberty Project in 2021. In recognition of his work in the renewal of liberal education, he has been named as the 2023 recipient of the Circe Institute's Paideia Prize. Dr. Seeley was my freshman theology tutor at Thomas Aquinas College. And my most vivid memory of that class was reading the difficult books of the Bible and being asked some obscure question to which we all muddled our heads, and Dr. Seeley just all looked at us and smiled and waited for us to sort of figure it out. It's a pleasure to have him here now to actually tell us what he thinks. Dr. Seeley.
So thank you all for coming. When I was asked to give this talk on the role of science, I jumped at the opportunity more for my sake than for yours, I'm afraid. I am working with the Boethius Institute on a curricular and teacher formation project that is a grand vision, which is to really completely reform, especially the high school math and science curriculum, so that the curriculum will begin to contribute to the overall goals of a liberal arts school rather than fight against it. So it was very good for me to have the whip behind me to prepare this talk, to get my thoughts in order, and then I'm looking forward to your reactions to it, positive, negative, outraged, whatever. I think it will help me as we start to plan our work going forward. And then you can see that from my background that I do a lot of things. At the TAC, in the Thomas Aquinas College curriculum, we had 4 years of math and science, each one. And we really focused on reading original authors and seeing the origins of the many different disciplines in the math and science realm. So I'm coming to you from that perspective rather than from a direct science teacher or scientist. Okay, so starting out here, at least when I look at this picture, I think of the old game, 3 of these things belong together, 1 of these things does not quite belong here. In this picture, in this montage, the scientist to me stands out as, do I really belong here? Does science belong in all of this, and how? So I imagine the question, why am I here, might frequently be on the minds of high school and middle school science teachers. Everyone talks about the central role of the trivium among the classical liberal arts, but those have been traditionally expressed as arts of language and training in abstract thought. Dorothy Sayers' stages of learning a subject can be mapped onto the ordinary way of teaching physics, chemistry, and biology, but does not seem particularly illuminating nor to fit very well. The quadrivium, the ancient mathematics and nascent science track, has not been prominent in the classical liberal arts reform, nor does it seem to have much of a connection to modern science. I asked myself, are science teachers happy teaching in a classical liberal arts school? Some may be happy that they can now be rigorous, and I don't really like that term rigorous. I don't know exactly. I always think of rigor mortis when you talk about rigorous. But they can be rigorous. They can demand that their students study hard and expect them to do well in their exams. But others might feel like they need to lower their standards because the formulaic problem-solving characteristic of science is at odds with the true, good, beautiful wonder focus of the rest of the school. They might also notice that some of these schools seem to prefer having non-specialist liberal arts graduates teaching the science. They don't know the science very well, but they do have a passion for arousing wonder and provoking discussion. I sympathize with their difficulties. How to integrate science into a classical liberal education has not been given the attention it deserves. Thomas Aquinas College, where I taught for many years, has ordered its curriculum in such a way as to make this question prominent and to prepare its graduates to grapple successfully with it, hopefully. At Thomas Aquinas College, theology sits as queen, ready to judge the dispute between Aristotle's physics and Newton's mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Students are required to learn from both authors, recognizing their strengths, their disagreements, and wondering about how they both contribute to revealing the truth. So this was something that Ronald MacArthur, the founding president of Thomas Aquinas College, was very big on, was we need to understand Aristotle's physics and Newton's mathematical principles of natural philosophy from the inside, both of them. So we have to do them seriously so that we can understand their disagreements, but also how we might bring them together. I'm going to be drawing on my experience in that program, along with my experience working with schools in the classical liberal arts movement, to give a sense of the problem and suggest some general ways to make science a robust part of the curriculum. So, since science in our modern sense began with Francis Bacon, René Descartes, and the like in the 17th century, it has been at war with the humanistic tradition from the Renaissance over who's going to be top dog in education. And there are a lot of interesting novels where this comes up in like the 19th century, early 20th century novels. You get a sense of, if it's about a school, about this fight going on between science and the old classical humanist education. By seizing the name science for what they did, scientists put themselves well on the way to victory. At first, those following the new ways of studying nature called themselves natural philosophers. So Newton would have described himself as a natural philosopher. Newton's famous work is called The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. So he wrote that saying, we need to get some math stuff down about nature so that we can do natural philosophy fruitfully. But science replaced philosophy over the course of the 18th century. The predominant modern use, this is from the Online Etymological Dictionary. It's one of my favorite resources now. It's really a great thing. Talking about the word science, the predominant modern use as natural and physical science, generally restricted to the phenomena of the material universe and its laws, is by mid-19th century. So that use of science, when we say science, we mean physics, we mean a material chemistry and biology. That use of it only became predominant in the middle of the 19th century. William Ewell coined the term scientist. So scientist was coined in 1833 to describe those who were professionally devoted to science. And they were replacing the amateurs and university professors who had dominated the field up till then. Now, etymologically, science is an English derivative from the word scire, which means to know. So there's a conflict, there's a fight built into the very word. Who are the knowers? Who really know things? Now, the fight, I think, at least for the early developers of modern science was not really with the classical humanists. Classical humanists didn't really they didn't talk about science anyway. I don't think they were about knowing in that sense. It was really with the scholastics and their predecessors, and with the Averroists, I think. So Thomas Aquinas is the great representative of the scholastics. The modern spirit rejected all the ancient claims to knowledge. And, sorry. I think that I might have cut something out here. No. Yes, I did. Sorry, I deleted something here that I got to add in.
Control Z.
Yeah, I know, right. Yeah, okay, no, I'm good, I didn't delete it, okay, all right. The modern spirit rejected all the ancient claims to knowledge, and you know, if you read Bacon or Descartes, they're pretty harsh on what the ignorance that they thought came before them. They considered it at best opinion and at worst mere prejudice and ignorance. Now, to be fair, this could be seen as a retaliation against the scholastic view. So St. Thomas Aquinas captured the scholastic view well when he wrote in his introduction to Aristotle's Posterior Analytics, "There is one process of reason which induces necessity, where it is not possible to fall short of the truth. And by such a process of reasoning, the certainty of science is acquired. The certitude obtained is derived either from the mere form of the syllogism or from the matter along with the form, because the propositions employed are per se and necessary." So in other words, how do you come to have real knowledge that's absolutely certain? Well, you do it by having an intuitive grasp of certain principles and then following the form of the syllogism and reaching necessary conclusions. The modern approach rejects this idea that we get this intuitive grasp of certain principles and doesn't have any use for syllogistic reasoning. On the other hand, what we think of as science today was not thought by Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics to be knowledge at all. No matter how much experience one gathers based on careful and extensive observation, the conclusions drawn can never be certain and can only produce at best a state of opinion, or in Plato's phrase, a likely story. So the best you're going to get from the scientific approach of a Bacon or a Galileo is a likely story. Induction, the linchpin of Baconian reasoning, can only achieve certainty if all the instances are known, so you know every single instance. But this is impossible in matters of observation. We can never sense what, every cricket, can't do it. So you just never know when you maybe have 1 million samples that support your idea, but then the 1,000,001st one might just overturn the theory completely. Thomas would say that you can reach a state of opinion, but never one of knowledge. And I think that there's been a debasement of opinion that I think is one of the worst things that in contemporary education and in the contemporary culture. For Thomas, opinion is achieved. Opinion means you're in a state when your mind leans completely to one side. You don't have any evidence to the other side, though you know there might be some. So to have an opinion is a very rational act. And that's very good because all of us, almost everything we think is a matter of opinion for us. So it's very important that it be rational. We learn to have rational opinions. Whereas what we teach our kindergartners, first graders, second graders, third graders is that facts are what tell us what happened and can be proven true or false. Opinions are attitudes or judgments that can't be proven right or wrong. It's about how you feel. So that's a really pernicious thing that we have built into, we teach regularly at the basis of our common schooling. So at least when Bacon and that, they say, oh, you just have opinion, they mean it's just based on your feelings. When Thomas says it's just opinion, he means that's a really reasonable thing you're holding, but you never know when it might be overturned. Lavoisier, who's the founder of modern chemistry, he inserted Bacon's view of these things into the introduction to his excellent textbook, The Elements of Chemistry. We must trust in nothing but facts. These are presented to us by nature and cannot deceive. We ought in every instance to submit our reasoning to the test of experience, and never to search for truth but by the natural road of experiment and observation. Thus mathematicians obtain the solution of a problem. So, so this is pretty hard to say that to gain knowledge, we can only trust to facts which have to be tested by experiment. That rules out all kinds of philosophical reasoning, all kinds of theological reasoning. It can never be knowledge, right? Because we don't start simply with facts, and we can't test it by experiment. Galileo and Newton took a different approach from that of Bacon. Bacon is very much, you have to do all of the observations and then kind of gradually rise up to general axioms based simply on what you've observed. Galileo and Newton say, hey, mathematically this would be cool for nature. Let's see what follows from that. Hey, test it by experiment. It works. And so they are very much a top-down approach to setting up science. And so they're theoretical in a way that Bacon isn't. Yet still, they also accepted that all knowledge really is going to end up being grounded, only guaranteed by the test of experiment. Okay, so the fight over the title of knowers was won by the moderns. This has had profound implications for our age. I think it's right to call Europe before the Reformation the age of Christendom. In Europe at the time, there was no political unity, but there was a deep religious and ecclesial unity that was real. Now we live, I think, in an important way, in the age of science, or maybe more properly, in the age of the scientists. What unites, and this is, I'm not so sure about this, but I'm going to say it very, very strongly. What unites our civilization is an implicit faith in the power of science to govern us. If you recall the Great Pluto Crisis, you will know what I'm talking about. Millions of people were scandalized that an article in their planetary catechism that they had learned by heart in school was being altered by the priests who had instituted it. More recently, during the COVID crisis, we demanded that scientists make all the most important decisions about the world and how it was to live. And scientists believed they were up to it. Now, I'm not going to take a position on the decisions that were actually made, but I was aghast that that was what our society did. And that we signed over our decision-making responsibilities that our governors did to the scientists and the people. That was what the people wanted. So we're in this state now of scientific fideism, right? It makes sense that we don't trust our governors because they neither have nor pretend to have wisdom. Science, one of the fallouts is that really science has banished wisdom. If all you can do, the only way you can know is through the scientific method, then there can't be any real wisdom. So we've ceased to believe in it, and that's why T.S. Eliot lamented, where is the wisdom we lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we lost in information? And if this is true of political wisdom, it is even more true for the highest wisdom, the knowledge of God, which, as Aristotle pointed out, is extraordinary, wonderful, abstruse, godlike, and useless, because it is not human goods they are looking for. I had a particularly striking experience of the fideistic trust the young learn to put in scientists when I was in the Netherlands at the end of the last summer. So my colleague Jeff Lehman and I at the Boethius Institute, we were teaching the quadrivium to a new group of master's students at a new place in the Pascal Institute in Leiden. And so we would go out there for a week to do courses with them and then work them through the quadrivium via Zoom. These are very smart students. I was very impressed with them. We were spending a week there we were introducing the ancient discipline of astronomy, and we were discussing the Timaeus of Plato, and then began Ptolemy. And so in the beginning of Ptolemy's Almagest, he's got a chapter where he argues that the earth isn't moving, right? And he gives some pretty good evidence for it. You know, if the earth were moving, we would be moving at 1,000 miles an hour right now. So we would be going one way 1,000 miles an hour. The clouds would like whoosh that way. If you threw anything up in the air, it would go whoosh like that. And things would fly. There'd be centrifugal force. Everything would fly away from the Earth. So he ends up saying it's pretty ridiculous for anybody to think the Earth is moving and causing what we see in the night sky. Now, I remember when I encountered that as a sophomore in college, when I first read that text from Ptolemy, I thought, wow, it really is pretty crazy to believe that we're moving that fast right now. And to say we were moving that fast and we don't notice it at all. Now, I was sure that he was wrong because everybody else had told, my whole schooling, everybody told me the Earth is really moving like that. But at least it's like, I don't know that. And in fact, it flies in the face of my common sense to think that we're doing that. So I have this deep trust in what I've been taught to accept that and not even question it. Now, I didn't like being in that state. I didn't like to be in a state of having to trust what people have told me against what was obvious to my senses. Now, I've always brought this sort of thing up with my students, sort of the kind of question I used to drive them crazy. And I was doing this with the Dutch students. Like, how are you so absolutely certain that the Earth is moving? And I was really struck by the brightest student there and somebody who had no problem challenging me anytime I said anything, no problem challenging the authors that we were reading. I was very struck by this conversation, so I wrote it up in a dialogue form, so I'm going to just give you a little bit of the dialogue. She said, I asked, well, what about Ptolemy? Would you have believed Ptolemy at the time? She said, I probably would have believed him then, but we now know that the Earth is really moving. So it still seems a waste of time to study an astronomy that is based on a false premise. What do you mean by we know? Who is we? Does that include you? Do you know that the Earth moves? Of course I do. That's what I've always been taught. It's what everybody says. And it has led to so many wonderful inventions. But doesn't it fly in the face of your common experience, your common sense? Shouldn't we have to have strong arguments to believe something so absurd as that we are currently moving that fast, along with the canal, Leiden's got lots of canals, and all the buildings around us? Yes, I suppose so. But the experts know these. And don't we have new experiences like being on the moon and even seeing the Earth spin? Which experts know this? Who first told you that the Earth moves? I don't know, my 5th grade teacher? No, probably my parents. Were you shocked when they told you that? Well, yes, I suppose I was. Do you think your parents knew the arguments? What about your 5th grade teacher? Do you think your 5th grade teacher knew the arguments to convince that person that the Earth is really moving? How about the authors of the high school textbooks, the science textbooks? Did they know it? How about the engineers who make the planes and the jets? Do they know the arguments to prove that the Earth is really moving? But it'd be crazy not to trust the experts, she said. If we don't trust them, we'll never get anywhere. Do you think that if you were alive in 1325, you would have said, of course, everyone knows that the Earth doesn't move and the heavens revolve around the Earth? Yes, I would have. And I would have been right to do so. If we don't trust the experts, then we're liable to fall for whatever some nut starts posting on the internet. Fair enough, I said, but wouldn't it be truer to say not we know now, but we trust now that the Earth really moves? Truer and I think healthier. Why healthier? It would continually remind us of our real epistemological state, not only our personal state, but that of our society. When it comes to science, almost everyone, novices and experts alike, are in a state of trusting the foundational principles that they have been told. Their task is not to come to know them, but to apply those ideas to current technical problems. And my colleague said, isn't this what Timaeus has been trying to teach us? When we engage in accounts about the natural world, we're not looking into the intelligible world in which eternal knowledge of the truth is to be hoped for and insisted upon, but rather in the world of opinion, in which we should trust the most likely accounts. These should be built up out of experience and argument, but also governed and purified by what we really know of the world that is. And we should not be too surprised or discouraged intellectually when the likely accounts cease to be likely in the face of new experiences or better accounts. So you can see, I'm the questioner and he's the wise guy, the wise ones. And then we had another student who's an interesting Dutchman. He's a big Trump guy, so he wears red, the MAGA hats, and he's got pictures of Trump in his room. So he said, "Oh, I agree with that. Trusting experts is what keeps us locked in the messes we are in now." But the other student replied, "I don't think it's healthy. I think it's dangerous. People won't believe experts. They'll believe whatever they read on the internet." So then my colleague said, "Shouldn't we look more carefully for signs of what is trustworthy?" So what makes us convinced that we should trust these people when they tell us things? Now, we didn't push that further, but I wonder what she would have said, that she was an atheist, would have said if I pointed out that all the experts in 1325 also testified that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, science has come to dominate our world in large part because it has given us what it promised. We now have a detailed understanding of how the natural world works, and we can make it conform to our desires. But scientific fideism has come much more from media and education. K-12 education has contributed significantly to this, probably much more to scientific fideism than to actually getting students ready to contribute to the advancement of science. I was surprised recently reading John Dewey's Experience in Education to find out how important the triumph of science was for his insistence on his experience-based theory of education. He believed that in every class and in every school activity, the young should be accustomed to the scientific method of observation, hypothesis, testing. The educational system, he said, must move one way or another, either backward to the intellectual and moral standards of a pre-scientific age, or forward to ever greater utilization of scientific method in the development of the possibilities of growing and expanding experience. And this is really striking. For I am so confident of the potentialities of education when it is treated as intelligently directed development of the possibilities inherent in ordinary experience, that I do not feel it necessary to criticize here the other route, nor to advance arguments in favor of taking the route of experience. So science has so dominated, I don't even have to argue against my opponents. Just ignore them and move forward. Now, I don't think that he ever applied the scientific method to sort of test the results of his experience. Every time with him, it's like, oh, it failed. But that's because we haven't tried hard enough yet. Let's try harder. So to the extent that science destroys the hope for wisdom and grounds all certainty on the experimentally testable facts, it threatens the goals of a classical liberal arts education. So should we banish science if we could? And I know there are all sorts. We have got testing, we've got parental expectations and stuff, but in our ideal world, we just get rid of science from our curriculum. Of course not. We would not want to deny ourselves nor our students the whole realm of wonder-filled knowledge that manifests truth, goodness, and beauty in the natural world. It would also prevent our students from understanding the power and the limitation of the accomplishments of the human spirit and hinder them from understanding the world in which they live and how it came to be. So how do we integrate it? I'm going to offer some suggestions, some that are already being tried and some that are virtually untested. Most of them are just cooked up in my brain and I haven't talked to people about it much. These seem to me ways not only to incorporate science, but to make it a powerful part of our education. We might even please the real scientists. In his cult hit, A Mathematician's Lament, Paul Lockhart claimed that no mathematics is normally taught in K-12 education, meaning by mathematics what he as a mathematician loves. He said, you never get a taste of that in K-12 education. So I wonder to what extent the passionate scientists would say something like he said about math. This rich and fascinating adventure of the imagination has been reduced to a sterile set of facts to be memorized and procedures to be followed. By removing the creative process and leaving only the results of that process, you virtually guarantee that no one will have any real engagement with the subject. By concentrating on what and leaving out why, science is reduced to an empty shell. It is the argument itself which gives the truth its context and determines what is being really being said and meant. So you who are scientists and science teachers will have to tell me to what extent you feel that way about the current system, the current curricular things. Now, many schools have made an important change in the early grades. We should not waste time, kind of following the Dorothy Sayers 3 stages of learning. We should not waste our time with our youngest students by trying to teach them abstract concepts such as matter, space, atoms, and water cycles. The students at this age shouldn't really be introduced to science at all, not in its specifically modern form. Natural history, which is the ancient precursor to philosophy, and it was perfected by the likes of Aristotle and Pliny, is particularly appropriate to the youngest students. So this involves not only learning to make detailed observations, but also learning the names of a wide variety of constellations, minerals, plants, and animals, and to some extent their classifications. So where was this one? Yeah, okay. I'm going to go back. Don't pretend you didn't see that. Okay. Now, we can continue this Sayers-like approach into the dialectical stage. So what would you do with middle school students? And I don't really know if exactly what people are doing in that time, but I'm thinking that at that stage, students can be prepared to do real science by learning traditional techniques of measurement and experiment, perhaps while learning about and reproducing famous experiments, such as Priestley's discovery that the air is not a simple substance, and Lavoisier's proof that oxygen is lost during combustion. There are lots of really cool experiments that they can do, and they can understand the context why the experiment is set up without thinking they have to understand how this whole fits into a particular physical or chemical theory. But it's a good time to train them to do the experiments well. So when Thomas Aquinas College, when we do the science portion, we try to do as many labs as we can, probably actually way more than are normally done in science programs, but we do them very badly. Because I never got really trained to do it in all of my high school, all of my science years. I never really got trained to do the experiments, and I'm lazy. So it's a good time with the middle school students to make them do the work and to actually make them see how difficult it is to measure things accurately. And
Why do you think that real scientists do experiments very well?
Why do they do it well?
Why do you think that they do it well?
Oh, I don't know that they do now. I do know Lavoisier did them well. So when you read the people who founded the sciences, they actually did they're models for experiment and observation. I'm going to talk about, we've talked about Lavoisier, I'll talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, but science has completely gone away from experiments beyond kind of the data gathering things, maybe. Okay, so that's what I was thinking would be a good focus in middle school. Now, science in the sense of method, principle, and theory is appropriate to the high school level. But here I would like to distinguish between what we should require of all students, distinguish that from what is ordered to preparing professional scientists. So at least the science classes I had when I was in high school, they were a debased form of the preparation which was meant to be helpful for college science courses. So if I was required to take a science course, but taking the science course meant I was being trained to be a physicist, or I was being trained to be a chemist. At least that was the ideal. It was really bad, but that was what they were trying to do. Now, I think that STEM education is kind of trying to break us out of that in one way, but Aristotle suggests we take a different attitude towards these disciplines which are important to learn, but we can't do them well. We can't be professionals at them or don't want to be. So he says that every systematic science, the humblest and the noblest alike, and this, by the way, is from his beginning of his work on the parts of animals. So he's going to go through a treatise where he's talking in detail about the parts of animals. And Aristotle was a tremendous observer. He still has observations which are striking today. Anyway, so this is the beginning of that. He says, I'm going to be talking about the parts of animals. This might not seem like this is exciting stuff to you philosophers, but we should learn it. This is very important. And he says, every systematic science, the humblest and the noblest alike, seems to admit of two kinds of proficiency, one of which may be properly called scientific knowledge of the subject, while the other is a kind of educational acquaintance with it. For an educated man should be able to form a fair offhand judgment as to the goodness or badness of the method used by a professor in his exposition. To be educated is, in fact, to be able to do this. So I need to have an understanding of the sciences, just as a part of general education. I need to have an understanding of the sciences well enough so that I can say, oh, if somebody's making scientific claims, I can kind of start to look at their research and be able to tell, are you guys following the normal kinds of procedures that actually lead to valid conclusions here or not? So that's the kind of general understanding of specific disciplines that the liberally educated person should have. And I think that this is a very good goal for high school. Now, if we were to follow this advice, we would not force all students to gain a level of skill in problem solving needed by those planning a future career in physics, engineering, chemistry, or biology. Those who want that training should be able to take it as electives, and they probably would do a lot better if it was the people who wanted it and were good at it. Those are the ones who are actually learning to become machine calculators and things like that. But they should still be required to take the general science course so that they would have a human understanding of the disciplines they're working on. On the other hand, we should require all students to study more science and math than we do now. So I would like to see science and math be all 4 years of the education should have those courses in it. We could hope to give all students a good grounding in the methods and major findings of biology, physics, and chemistry. We could go even further in each of those sciences than we do today. We would not leave most of our students in the awkward position, this is my position about my high school, having bad memories of being poorly trained in science which is at least 25 years behind the times. They would not need to master much, but they would be initiated into mysteries currently closed to them, and perhaps be less subject to sophistical manipulation and intimidation. So scientists intimidate you by just, they know all sorts of things that you don't know, and especially if you say, oh, I'm not a science person, like, okay, then you're just helpless before somebody who says they are a science person and makes a lot of these claims. We might even see more of our students fall in love with science and be inspired to gain proficiency and enter into those fields as careers. Now, I can only give general ideas of what I think all students should learn. To begin with, they should learn the general methods of science. They should learn the general methods of science by experiencing the Baconian scientific procedure of observation, question, hypothesis, experimentation, reformulation, and theory. Jean-Henri Fabre, the 19th century French entomologist, who wrote both for scientists and for the young, he says, I write to make the young, I write serious science, but I write it in such a way as to make the young fall in love with what I love. He's a great model that way. He provides excellent opportunities for this, for learning the procedures, Baconian procedures of science. He writes detailed descriptions of his careful observations of the insects, of the questions that they posed to him, their behavior posed to him, of experiments that he designed to try to test his ideas, of the experiments, what the results of the experiments were, when they failed, when they succeeded, and then the conclusions he finally drew, but always saying, well, this is just the beginnings of the conclusions. This is the beginnings of what I want to see. So he's a great model in that. Students should also experience the mathematical approach. That is, when you take a mathematical principle and hypothesize it because of its simplicity or elegance, like Galileo's positing that bodies fall according to a simple addition of velocities. So in 1 unit of time, 1 unit of velocity is added. He just said posited that, like that's mathematically that would be great, and then he said what would follow from that, and brought it to a point where he could test it, and then design the tests and design the instruments needed for the tests in order to prove that he was right. I would also like students to learn the stories behind scientific breakthroughs, which are often fascinating and inspiring. By working through key developments in the history of science, they will get an inside grasp of how science works and how it has affected our understanding of the world. For example, they should learn that the idea of atoms is neither evident nor simply a mathematical imaginative assertion, but was theoretically posited to explain why acids and bases combine in simple ratios according to weight. Something they didn't expect, and it happened, and then Dalton proposed the atomic theory to explain why that happened. So they should go through that. And this book, The Mystery of the Periodic Table by Ben Weicker, leads us through the whole development of the periodic table from ancient times through all the early scientists and how they came about it, with detailed descriptions of the experiments. So it's really good that way.
Does it come with other little short separate stories?
It's got he does tell you stories about the scientists, and then the whole thing is in story form, but it also is something you can follow scientifically and do the experiments with your students. So that way they're not just fideistic about atoms, they actually see the clear evidence for them and why you would hold it. But then also they realize that the balls, at least when I was young, you just see the ball models, like that's just completely made up. What they know is that things combine atomically. They didn't know, at least at the time, what those things actually looked like, and quantum mechanics kind of throws that all the time. Another example, and one close to my heart, is the development of the central importance of the idea of energy in physics. And I put this other book up here, Gavin Polhamus, The World. So he's a teacher, he's a physicist, but also a high school physics teacher in Denver, who's coming out with a book where he's teaching physics, but he does it by tracing the history of the development of physical ideas. And he starts with some of the ancient quadrivium ideas, the Pythagorean consonant intervals, the discovery about music, goes through the development of the science of motion with Galileo, Newton, Descartes, and then ends up with Helmholtz, and Helmholtz then reflects back on the whole idea of consonants and why we have it. So I think it's a very promising approach that he has. But this one is, I would love to get this in there more deeply. When I was at the beginning of my high school physics course, I was told that work equals force times distance, and energy is capability of doing work. I had no idea what they were talking about or why. It's like, that's not work. Work is what I do that makes me sweat, right? But they never connected it, like, and I just couldn't conceptually deal with physics, so I almost failed the physics class. I used to simply partly blame that on my laziness, but then I realized that, in other courses where I got excited about things, I would read the whole curricular material in about a month. I'd get away because I got excited. There was no excitement here, no attention to those sorts of questions. So I was so excited a few years ago when I discovered a talk by Heinrich von Helmholtz, 19th century physicist, in which he traced the idea of work from the sweat thing through different mechanical developments into considerations of energy as capability of doing work, and the evidence that energy is a conserved quantity. Energy is like really mysterious, like this ball, a glowing ball, right, that you might see on Star Trek. But no, energy, they don't know what it is, but they can prove or give a ton of experimental evidence that energy is never lost when you go from one form to another. So that heat and electricity and chemistry and kinetic energy, all those transformations occur, and the energy is never lost. So that's amazing. Okay. So by understanding the methods of science and learning its history, students should develop a sense both of its power and limitations. The power to manifest, for instance, in the periodic table, the power that's manifest, for instance, in the periodic table when you can predict new substances. So Mendeleev, when he developed the periodic table, he was the first one who proposed it. He said, look, there are these missing areas. There ought to be substances here. Let me tell you what those substances are like. So this one I'm going to call ecosilicon. And he tells you what its weight is, what its atomic weight is, what its freezing point is, its boiling point is, what its color is. He told you all those things. And then 19 years later, they actually discovered the thing and said, oh, look, you're pretty close to what you were pretty. So that's an amazing power of science to be able to do that. Students also need, sorry, this is Helmholtz, good quote, but too long. Students also need to develop a sense of the essentially dialectical character of scientific theories. The great theories represent a great advance in both the knowledge and power of the human race, and yet are always and only the best opinions currently available. They are likely stories, so subject to regular grand revolutions. If no educated person should ever be surprised by a scientific revolution. These revolutions can have tremendous cultural impacts. So Newton's development of the mechanical universe affected the way everybody thought about everything. Philosophy and politics. When you read the political writers, now they talk about forces all the time in understanding politics, right? Well, he based that all on an idea of absolute space and time. Well, then Einstein, on May 29th, 1919, Einstein is proved right when he claims that space and time are relative. Well, that shook the world. And then it actually contributed to the embracing of moral relativism and psychological relativism that dominated the 20th century. So students should, I think that the students should be aware of this kind of dramatic impact, and they should see they should make connections between scientific discoveries that they've learned about and the culture and how it impacts the culture and how culture impacts it. Okay, so in conclusion, I hope that these few examples persuade you that far from having little to no role in classical liberal arts education or even being antagonistic to it, science classes offer tremendous opportunities for preparing maturing students to lead a learned life. They can foster wonder and delight in learning in unique ways and develop logical thought by careful attention to principles, methods, and evidence. While coming to love and understand science, or at least get a glimpse of why many do, so it's not like everybody's going to come out loving science, but at least you can say, okay, I can see why you might like this, and I can kind of understand it. Students can be freed from lifelong subjection to the dictatorship of science domination by realizing its power and its limitations. Moreover, properly done, science education provides the best context, I think, for philosophical conversations appropriate to high school. So a lot of us want to do philosophy with high school students. I'm always kind of allergic to that. But I think that science, with the questions that science is naturally going to raise, is the right context to bring up at least some general philosophical ideas that can help them sort some things out. So, for instance, is science our only way to know? Is it our best and most certain way to know? Do we really live in a disenchanted mechanical universe? Or are we part of a universe where form shines through the mechanisms and the natural world is driven by a love of the eternal good? A preliminary look at the answers provided by thinkers such as Aristotle and Boethius, Descartes and Nietzsche, writers such as Fitzgerald and Tolkien, can help them to see the importance of wisdom, hopefully choosing to develop in themselves and use it to lead their families, associations, and communities. May we live to see the day when none of the products of our schools will say, I am not a science person. Thank you.